never thought I'd find myself in a situation that felt straight out of a horror movie, but sometimes life throws you a curveball that leaves you questioning reality itself. It all started one chilly autumn evening when I decided to take a road trip to visit a friend who lived a few hours away in a quaint little town nestled in the hills. I was excited for a weekend getaway, a break from the hustle and bustle of city life, and the promise of cozy fireside chats and homemade apple pie. As I cruised down the winding country roads, the sun began to set, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The trees, stripped of their leaves, stood like skeletal guardians along the roadside. I had a playlist of my favorite tunes blaring through the car speakers, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had crept in with the twilight. About an hour into my drive, I realized I needed to fill up the gas tank. I pulled into a rundown gas station that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. The flickering neon sign overhead read, "Open," but the place had an air of abandonment. I shrugged off the goosebumps prickling my skin, convincing myself it was just the chill in the air. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed an old man sitting in a rocking chair on the porch of the gas station. His eyes were hidden beneath the brim of a battered hat, and he seemed to be humming an old tune. I gave him a nod, heading inside to pay for the gas. The interior was dimly lit, shelves lined with dusty cans and faded candy wrappers. A bell tinkled as I approached the counter, but no one appeared to greet me. I called out, but only silence answered back. It was like the place was stuck in time, a relic of a forgotten era. Just as I contemplated leaving, the old man from the porch shuffled in, moving with a deliberate slowness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He smiled, revealing a set of crooked teeth, and in a raspy voice asked if I was headed to the hills. I nodded, eager to pay and get back on the road. His eyes seemed to twinkle with a strange knowing as he warned me to be cautious, mentioning that the roads could be treacherous at night. I thanked him for the advice, paid for my gas, and hurried back to my car, trying to shake off the unsettling vibe of the place. Back on the road, the darkness deepened, and a thick fog rolled in, enveloping everything in a ghostly shroud. My headlights cut through the mist, but visibility was limited. I turned down the music, focusing on the road ahead when out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of something darting across the road. Slamming on the brakes, my heart pounded in my chest. I peered into the fog, but whatever it was had vanished. Trying to calm my nerves, I resumed driving, but my mind kept replaying the old man's warning. The road twisted and turned through the hills, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as if the very trees were whispering secrets, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Suddenly, my car's engine sputtered, and I felt the power steering give out. Panic surged through me as I wrestled the wheel, managing to pull over to the side of the road. I sat there, my breath fogging up the windows, unsure of what to do next. My phone had no signal, and I was miles from civilization. Just as despair began to creep in, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, cutting through the fog like a beacon of hope. A beat-up truck pulled up behind me, and out stepped a man, his face hidden in the shadows. He approached my window, and I hesitated for a moment before rolling it down slightly. He introduced himself as Jake, offering to take a look at my car. Reluctantly, I agreed, watching as he tinkered under the hood. Minutes passed, each one stretching into eternity, until he finally emerged, wiping his hands on a rag. He explained that my car's alternator had died and offered to give me a lift to the nearest town. With no other options, I accepted his offer, grabbing my bag and locking the car. As we drove through the fog, he began to tell me about the area, sharing local legends and ghost stories that sent shivers down my spine. One tale in particular caught my attention. A story about a haunted stretch of road where travelers would disappear without a trace, only to be found years later, wandering aimlessly, their memories erased. I tried to laugh it off, but his grave expression told me he believed every word. We reached the town, a sleepy settlement that seemed to belong to another time. Jake dropped me off at a small bed and breakfast, promising to return in the morning to help me sort out my car. That night, I lay in bed, the wind howling outside, rattling the windows. My mind raced with thoughts of the day's strange encounters, and sleep eluded me. In the early hours, I finally drifted off, only to be jolted awake by a loud crash. Heart pounding, I peered out the window, but the fog had returned, concealing everything in its ghostly embrace. Morning came, and true to his word, Jake arrived, taking me back to my car. We managed to get it to a mechanic, and as I waited for the repairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The townsfolk seemed friendly, yet there was a lingering sadness in their eyes, as if they were trapped in a place out of time. Finally, my car was ready, and I thanked Jake for his help, eager to leave the eerie town behind. As I drove away, the fog lifted, and the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the landscape. I breathed a sigh of relief, convinced that the strange series of events were behind me. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw the figure of the old man from the gas station standing by the roadside, tipping his hat in farewell. A chill ran down my spine, and I pressed the accelerator, eager to put as much distance between myself and that haunted stretch of road as possible. To this day, I can't explain what happened on that foggy night in the hills. Was it a series of coincidences or something more sinister? All I know is that when the fog rolls in, I can't help but remember the old man's warning and the haunting tales of that forgotten road. I remember this one night that still sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. It was a rainy Friday evening, and I was home alone, binge-watching some horror movies, as you do when you're trying to set the mood for a spooky night. I had just finished The Conjuring, and let me tell you, that movie left me on edge. I switched off all the lights, big mistake, and curled up under a blanket on my couch, ready to dive into the next film. As the thunder rolled outside, I heard a noise coming from the kitchen. It was the kind of noise that makes your stomach drop, like someone was moving around in there. I brushed it off as the wind or maybe my old house settling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I mean, it's just me and my cat, Whiskers, but we all know cats have a knack for acting weird when they're sensing something off. After a few minutes, I decided to investigate. I stood up and made my way to the kitchen, heart pounding. My mind was racing with thoughts of ghosts and ghouls. I flipped on the light and there was nothing. Just my empty kitchen staring back at me. I let out a nervous laugh, telling myself I was just being silly. I poured myself a glass of water and was about to head back to my cozy spot on the couch when I noticed something on the floor. A piece of paper. Curiosity piqued, I bent down to pick it up. It was a note, and my heart sank as I read it. "I'm watching you." Just as I was about to freak out, I remembered I had this weird habit of leaving notes around the house for myself. Reminders, grocery lists, that sort of thing. I convinced myself it was just an old note I'd forgotten about and headed back to the living room, trying to shake off the creeping dread. As I settled back onto the couch, Whiskers jumped up beside me, giving me that look cats do when they're plotting something. I turned on the next movie, but I couldn't focus. Every little creak and groan of the house made me jump. I was halfway through the film when I heard it again, a soft rustling sound, this time coming from the hallway. I paused the movie and held my breath, listening intently. "Okay, it's just the wind," I whispered to myself, though I wasn't convinced. I took a deep breath and reluctantly got up again, this time grabbing a kitchen knife just in case. I felt ridiculous, but whatever was going on in my house had me feeling like I was in a horror flick myself. I tiptoed down the hallway, the darkness swallowing me whole. As I reached the end, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. It was fast. Too fast. I turned my head, but there was nothing there. Just shadows and the eerie silence that felt like a blanket over my skin. I was about to head back when I noticed my front door was ajar, swinging slightly as if someone had just come in. My heart raced as I realized I definitely hadn't left it open. I stepped closer, knife gripped tightly, and pushed the door shut, locking it. Doubts flooded my mind. What if someone had entered while I was distracted? What if they were still in the house? I hurried back to the living room, locking the door behind me, and I decided to call a friend to ease my nerves. "Hey, can you come over? I think someone might be in my house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My friend laughed. "You just watched a bunch of horror movies, didn't you? You're fine. Just chill." I hung up, feeling a mix of annoyance and fear. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, but then the light started flickering. I could hear that rustling noise again, but this time it was louder, more frantic. It sounded like it was coming from my bedroom. I was frozen, caught between my instinct to run and the sheer terror of what might be lurking there. All I could think was, this is it. This is how I die. In a moment of sheer desperation, I decided to face whatever was happening. I crept down the hallway again, knife in hand, every step feeling like an eternity. As I reached my bedroom door, I hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, just like the front one had been. I pushed it open slowly, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The room was dark, but I could see the outline of my bed and something else. I squinted, trying to make it out. And there it was, a figure hunched over, rifling through my things. I gasped, adrenaline coursing through me as I raised the knife, ready to defend myself. "Who the hell are you?" I yelled, my voice shaking. The figure froze and slowly turned around. It was my roommate who had decided to surprise me by coming home early from her trip. She was just as startled as I was. "What the hell? I thought I told you I'd be back late." Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by embarrassment. I dropped the knife and burst into laughter, my heart still racing. "I thought you were a burglar," I said, still chuckling. She rolled her eyes at me, clearly annoyed that I'd been home alone in the dark, watching horror movies. We ended up staying up late, talking about how ridiculous the whole situation was. But even after I calmed down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The note was still on the counter, and I couldn't remember ever writing it. A few weeks later, I was cleaning up the apartment when I found another note tucked behind the couch. This one read, "I see you." I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't shake that feeling of being watched. I laughed it off, telling myself it was probably my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that night had left a lingering fear in my mind, one that would keep me looking over my shoulder for a long time. And to this day, I still wonder who, or what, was really watching me that night. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation that felt like it was ripped straight out of a horror movie. But one summer night, everything changed. Let me take you back to when I was just a clueless college student on summer break, eager to escape the mundane rhythm of everyday life. My friend Jake had this brilliant idea to head out to a cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway. Sounds cliché, right? But we were young and hungry for adventure, and the idea of no Wi-Fi and the promise of a campfire sounded like the perfect escape. The cabin was owned by Jake's uncle, and was supposedly in a secluded area of the woods, which, looking back, should have been our first red flag. We packed our bags, loaded the car with snacks, and hit the road. The drive itself was uneventful, a lot of laughs and playlists that were screamed at the top of our lungs. But as we got closer to the cabin, the road narrowed, and civilization seemed to vanish with every mile. It was just us, the twisting dirt road and the towering trees. We arrived just as the sun began to sink behind the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The cabin was rustic, to say the least, a creaky two-story structure that seemed to echo with the stories of the past. Inside, it was pretty basic, but charming in its own way. The first night was all about setting up, starting a fire, and sharing ghost stories, each one more ridiculous than the last. We had no idea what was in store for us. The next day, Jake suggested we explore the woods. Armed with nothing but a couple of water bottles and our phones, which of course had no signal, we ventured deeper into the forest. The air was crisp, the kind that fills your lungs with a sense of vitality. We walked for what felt like hours, losing track of time, until we stumbled upon something that stopped us in our tracks, a clearing in the woods with an old, dilapidated house sitting right in the center. Now, I'm not talking about a quaint little cottage. This was a full-on horror movie set piece. Windows broken, the door hanging off its hinges, and an aura that screamed, "Keep out." Naturally, being the curious, or perhaps stupid individuals we were, we decided to check it out. As we approached, the air seemed to grow colder. I remember feeling this shiver run down my spine, but I shrugged it off, chalking it up to the thrill of discovery. Once inside, the reality of the house hit us. The floor was covered in dust and debris, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew. But what really unnerved me were the walls. They were covered in old, faded photographs, hundreds of them, all of different people, none of whom we recognized. Who were these people? Why were their photos here? We had no answers, just a growing sense of unease. Jake, trying to lighten the mood, suggested we split up and explore more of the house. I reluctantly agreed, and while he headed upstairs, I chose to inspect the ground floor. As I moved through the rooms, each one seemed to echo with the faint whispers of the past. It was in one of these rooms that I found something truly chilling, a journal, lying open on a dusty old desk. The entries were dated decades ago, and they told the story of someone who had lived there, someone who slowly descended into madness. The final entry was nothing short of a scribbled mess, but one phrase was clear: "They're watching." At that moment, as if on cue, I heard a loud crash from upstairs. My heart leapt into my throat, and I raced up the stairs calling for Jake. I found him in one of the bedrooms, staring wide-eyed at a shattered window. "Did you see that?" he asked breathlessly. I hadn't seen anything, but the fear in his eyes was real. He claimed he saw a figure dart past the window, too fast to make out any details. We both decided it was time to leave. As we hurried back to the cabin, every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs seemed to echo with ominous intent. We didn't stop running until we were inside, doors locked and sitting in silence, the weight of our discovery heavy in the air. That night, sleep was elusive. Every creak of the cabin seemed amplified, and every shadow seemed to dance with malevolence. The next morning, we packed up and left, our excitement for the trip thoroughly extinguished. We never spoke of the house again, and I've never returned to that cabin. But sometimes when the night is still and the wind whispers through the trees, I think back to that journal and those haunting words. They're watching. And I wonder, did we leave that house behind, or did something follow us home? So if you ever find yourself in a secluded cabin in the woods with an eerie old house nearby, maybe think twice before going inside. Or better yet, find a nice crowded beach to spend your weekend. Trust me, you'll sleep better.